in the world.
Have sound. Good afternoon, my lovely audience. Day 2 of Vicky Frame's post-lunch sessions. There is almost a packed house. There must be something right happening in this room. Can we raise a round of applause for that? Just for you making it to here post-lunch. The way you are clapping, I'm sure the food is really nice. If it is not nice, we'll discuss it post-session. Let me call this session open. Let me introduce to you our esteemed moderator, Editor-in-Chief, the Mint publication, Mr. R. Sukumar. And he is going to be in conversation with Mr. Andy Kaplan. Have I pronounced that right, sir? Kaplan? Perfect. Nobody said that to me before. President, Worldwide Network, Sony Pictures Television on the future of TV. Ladies and gentlemen, post-lunch session.
All right. We have a fairly expansive topic, the future of TV, right? And which means we could speak forever or we could not speak at all. I'm going to try
somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, somewhere in the middle. I'm going to try and break it up into 3 parts. I want to discuss content with you, the content side of the business. I also want to discuss the distribution side of the business with you. And then because we are in India, where traditional TV or linear TV is still very big and still growing, I think that's the third thing I'd like to discuss. But let's start with content. Big challenge, and I think this is a universal challenge across the world. The cost of content keeps increasing in a very strange way, but also an entirely logical way. Viewers have moved away from loyalty to individual channels and networks, and the loyalty now is more to programs. So it's very, very programming driven. So you could have one hit program, but people could not watch anything else that you make. And you're facing competition from all sorts of people who were previously not in the TV business, who are now getting into the content business and appealing to a TV audience. The latest example being Netflix, which threw a lot of money into House of Cards and released it all in one go, the first season. 11 episodes, I think it was, in 13 episodes in one go. And tell us about what challenges you see on the content side of the business, what your plans are, what kind of partnerships you're envisioning in this area.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and certainly the idea that we're talking about the future of television, I found sort of daunting and presumptuous, but we'll take a stab at it. I think there's probably never been a better time to be in the content business. And certainly everything you say is true about the challenges. Costs are going up, but I think for the most part, we as content providers deal in a free market environment, and if costs are going up, it's because there's an infrastructure, an ecosystem to support that. But as content providers, I think there have never been more and more outlets to provide to sell to, which is certainly, what you want to have as a content provider. 30 or 40 years ago, in the United States, there were 3 networks and you would sell to them. Now there are hundreds of networks to sell your content to in the United States, and then, hundreds and hundreds and thousands more outlets around the world, and there are so many different opportunities to do it. Now, certainly the model of how it's done has changed. It used to be you would license your show to one of the main networks in the United States, and then you would earn some ancillary revenue by selling this content to television stations around the world. And while that model in some ways is still the same, certainly it's changed in so many ways that make life more complicated, but in some ways give the content providers more upside. You talked about the Netflix example of House of Cards, which has certainly been in the press a lot for a variety of reasons. If you think about Netflix as the U.S. network, and and they licensed the content from MRC, the provider, we, Sony, have the distribution of television and home entertainment internationally. And for the content provider, what they did was they licensed from a license fee from Netflix, and then they made a deal with us for international revenues and used that as a way to put together a revenue stream that obviously covered the cost for them, hopefully, and probably granted them upside. That's a totally different conversation than would have happened a few years ago. For us in the U.S. market, one of the big things that's changed is the secondary revenue streams, the so-called back end, where if a show was on the network long enough and accumulated enough episodes, it would then sell into syndication to free TV stations or cable networks. Now, there are a lot of new players in that world that are either supplementing those revenue streams or replacing them. Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, and so forth. And so I think the way the content providers are looking at the world is completely different now, but again, such different and tremendous opportunities that it's a great place to be.
Typically, what happens? You were speaking about the kind of partnerships you had, which wouldn't have happened a few years ago, and then soon after that, you spoke about the increase in the number of players who are there in the value chain, so to say. Typically, what happens in a lot of industries, other industries, is if the number of players increases, then your own take goes down. So what happens in this? As a content producer, when you create your own content, do you see your revenues going down because of this, or do you see yourself reaching out to more people who typically you wouldn't have reached out to, thereby offsetting whatever the partners make from this?
Yeah, I think the revenues aren't going down. I think they're just coming from different places and from more places. The windows are changing. There are more windows as part of the value chain. It used to be you would just license to linear television or maybe to pay TV and then to linear television. Now you have SVOD windows. You have electronic sell-through windows that are supplementing or replacing DVD windows. It's all getting divided up in a different sort of way, and there are more places you have to go to sell your content, but it seems that they're either adding up to the same or even more money. They just come in lots of different places, which puts a little bit of a challenge on the infrastructure, because you need to have different areas of expertise on the distribution side that allow you to capitalize and monetize these opportunities. You need to have more sophistication and more knowledge and more transparency into all of these other businesses, because these are now your buyers. You need to understand their businesses. You need to understand their version of ratings or subscriptions or however it is, so that you can make sure you're getting the right license fees for your content. It's a much more complicated world now, and it requires probably bigger but certainly different disciplines and infrastructure. But again, usually in these situations of chaos, there's usually opportunity.
We'll come to this bit you spoke about distribution and having to understand the businesses of the other players who have emerged in the business in a bit. But I just want to ask you about the content side. Typically, when you're sitting down and you're looking at content strategy for one of your channels, and you run a variety of channels around the world, as the complexity of that decision making changed in terms of what you make, what you buy, because I've noticed that most networks do have one or two flagship productions that they roll out, and you have a couple that are in the pipeline as well. But what kind of decision-making process goes on there? What kind of options do you consider? As the number of people you buy from increased, you've also tried out experiments where you've partnered with some studios and tried for some motion picture related spin-offs, the firm being one of those. How does it work?
So from an international network standpoint, or our international networks, and I'll put our India business aside for a moment because it's really a different, much more localized model. But for the most part, our networks around the world, Sony Entertainment Television, AXN, are networks that have been built up off of the acquisition of U.S. Programming, dramas for the most part, and comedies in some situations. And so while we certainly buy a lot of programming from our own studio, we also buy from all of the other studios. And so in a way, so I always say our job is to program the best networks we can, acquire the best programming we can to deliver the best networks to our audience, maximize our audience, our ratings, and eventually subscriber fees and advertising. And so the good news is there's a lot of people in the content business wanting to sell their content around the world. And as we grow and become more successful in these markets, we become more of a more important buyer. Each market's a little bit different, and our position in each market is different, and in some markets we're buying first window content, in some markets we're buying downstream content, and so the profile becomes different. But for our networks, AXN, for example, which is a action entertainment network, we always have the challenge of finding the balance between global and local. On the one hand, I want a viewer to be able to go into a hotel room, for example, in any country around the world and hopefully be able to turn on AXN and know what it is and know what that brand represents and know what the kind and quality of that programming is going to be. But at the same time, if you turn on that TV set in a hotel room in Brazil and watch AXN, it's going to be a different content experience than if you turn on that AXN in Portugal or Thailand or so forth. And the reason for that is a couple of things. First of all, the programming that's available in each of these markets is different just as on the basis of how each supplier sells their programming into a market and what their deals are and what rights they make available. And the other thing is that all content isn't the same, and some shows work better in a particular market and don't necessarily work in another market. Overall and on balance, a successful American show, and particularly an American drama, will sell and perform across the board, on a majority basis in most markets. But it's just not the audience viewing habits and desires on a market by market basis are different, and so we use research and focus groups and whatever local knowledge we can get about our networks in each market to program to maximize our ratings, and we have to be able to pivot and adjust and be local in that respect. We also have a local programming strategy in many of our markets where we're creating very local programming as an adjunct to this American programming, because American programming in a lot of these markets will take you so far, but eventually local programming will usually drive a higher rating because people want to see themselves, they want to see their own experiences, they want to sort of look in that mirror, and they want to look in their own neighborhood, and it gives us the ability to have a different and broader kind of a conversation with advertisers and broaden out the reach and the revenue potential in those markets. And the last piece you mentioned was some of the sort of global co-productions we're doing. We did a deal with E1, a Canadian broadcaster, and co-produced The Firm. We're involved with Gaumont Television right now on Hannibal, and we're involved with Tandem Productions, a German-France company, with a series called Crossing Lines. And the reason we're doing these kinds of deals is to have a different creative input into the series to help mold and guide them a little bit to be more applicable to our networks around the world. And also it has to do with wanting to continue to further invest in content. We gain access to rights in these shows that we wouldn't necessarily have access to when we acquire a show from one of the Hollywood studios, whether they be digital, online, mobile, everything other than traditional linear rights, which are usually either not available or too expensive to acquire. When we invest in this content, we have access to this programming, which gives us the ability to utilize this content on our networks in a promotional and distribution way that we can't do when we acquire programming. So that there's a whole lot of different ways we come at the programming and content initiatives for our network. But again, it's really finding the challenge of the global versus local and trying to find the right balance.
Let's talk about this global and local thing a little bit more. You're present in almost 160 countries, 124 channel feeds. And like you said, market like India, you mentioned that the local approach would be, the localization part of it would be much more significant. But what do you do to retain the overall character of the brand that you have? Accepting that AXN in Brazil might be very, very different from AXN in Portugal, I'm assuming that the core premise or the core of the channel remains the same, action and entertainment. So how do you retain that even as you localize? What kind of checks and balances do you have?
It's a real challenge, and we have a unique additional challenge in that our brands have been created from the outside looking in the sense that we don't have really a flagship mothership in the United States like a Discovery or an ESPN would have. And so we've had to build these global brands on a sort of market-by-market regional basis. We do a lot of homework, we do a lot of research, we do a lot of brand studies, and we work very closely with a centralized team, marketing team, but also with the local teams to push the boundaries of there's a lot of good tension of pushing the boundaries between global and local, because the guy in Brazil will tell you, well, that AXN needs to be different because we're different here in Brazil, and the guy in Spain will tell you something different, and we want them to have the latitude to localize, but at the same time you have to have some sanctity in what the brand represents on a global basis. It's an ongoing challenge. It's a good, healthy dialogue, and you're never done. You never solve it. It's constantly evolving, and it creates for a lot of interesting debates in the conference rooms. But like I say, it's all healthy, and it's all born out of passion from local management about their markets and knowledge of their markets, and wanting to build something that really resonates with their own audience. I can tell you that when I first came into this job almost 11 years ago, and I was sort of looking at where we were with AXN, and I said, well, what are we running? AXN Asia was running CSI, and AXN Spain was running the West Wing. And I thought, where's the commonality there, and what's the explanation there? And each local manager had a rationale for it. We push the bounds, we give them the latitude, and we have to pull them back in sometimes. It's an interesting part of the job.
But you wouldn't do that anymore, right? CSI and West Wing, because they are fairly extreme. Or do you think even those extremes make sense in a local kind of environment?
I don't know that West Wing's exactly the right thing, but I think the point is we would stretch to a point, and each of these networks is also at a different maturation stage in their markets, because some have been around longer than others, and so you can't just say one size fits all. And so I've really encouraged our guys to know their business and to know their market and to know what works. And I think on balance we've gotten it right mostly, but every now and then we stray a little bit and we have to pull it back in.
Distribution. Let's move on to distribution. Primarily because people now consume content, even video content, in a variety of ways on a variety of devices. The landscape has changed completely, and you have all sorts of new players who have come in, and you also have traditional companies like your own trying new things. So in this context, can you tell us a little bit about Crackle, which is your own non-linear TV viewing kind of app that you've got, and also the kind of hardware integration that you've managed to do, because you do have you have entered into deals with some of the hardware companies to have this preloaded, right? So can you just tell us about Crackle?
Well, Crackle is a U.S. company, or started in the U.S. It's been around for about 5 years. It's gone through a number of different iterations, but it's settled into what it is now, which is our, in a way, it's our U.S. network. It's a nonlinear network. You go to the Crackle site, however you get to it, and you can watch movies, television series, and originally produced series programming by Crackle in an on-demand sort of way. It's streamed content and it's advertiser supported, and it's a really interesting model. We sort of are in a place on our own right now, as everybody has chased a subscription world or a transactional world. Really, we're the only fully advertiser-supported entertainment site like this. Hulu also does it, but Hulu's also been migrating over the last couple of years more towards the subscription business, and they're also very television series oriented, and so Crackle being a little more movie oriented has let us carve out this niche. But what is interesting is on a distribution standpoint, like our linear networks around the world, which are dual revenue stream, but advertiser supported in addition to basic tier subscription services, it's all about distribution and being everywhere and garnering as many eyeballs as you possibly can. And so what does that mean for Crackle? They need to, which is, gets to the consumer in a lot of different ways. It started out as a website-based application, but it's on your tablet and it's on your mobile phone and it's on any kind of those devices. But to garner in a single revenue stream, it's all advertising, and to maximize your advertising stream, you need to be in front of as many eyeballs as possible. So how do you do that? Is you get on every platform you can, and so you get your app on every mobile handset you possibly can, and every connected TV, and every game platform, and every possible nonlinear outlet you can. And our guys have done a really great job in probably being as ubiquitous as any app or nonlinear network of its kind, and it's really getting a lot of traction. So we looked at that model and we said, where can we take that internationally? And we decided that Latin America and Brazil was the next best place for a number of reasons. First of all, we have 3 very successful networks down there linear networks that could be used as a promotional platform for the online or for the nonlinear world. We also have a very big and strong ad sales operation down there, which you need to have to allow you to sell the advertising and maximize that world. And then it's also a market that's got pretty robust broadband penetration and usage down there, and a pretty strong growing economy. And so all of those factors together let us decide that it was the right place to go in. And in about a pretty short year, we've blown through our usage expectations. We thought we would be on 2 platforms. During the first year, we were on 9, and it's been terrific. And we're now looking at other places around the world to expand that offering. And again, we're sort of the only American content advertiser-supported business down there, because everybody else seems to think that the subscription model is the way to go. And I look at it all the time and I go, we're either really smart or really stupid. I'm not exactly sure which one it is just yet, but I guess when you're zigging when everybody else is zagging.
Are you seeing enough traction from advertisers?
Yeah. They're dying to get into this world, either because they think that there's real viable audience metrics that they want to reach, or because it's the next new thing, or whatever it is. Crackle in the United States is predominantly male 18 to 49, not an easy demographic to get to, so this is an alternative. Latin America, they're knocking on our door, faster than we can knock on their door, because I think the advertisers really feel that this digital world is a place they want to be, that they have to be, and that it's a way of getting to an audience that traditional linear TV isn't quite getting for them at this point.
I find this fascinating because it's very contrarian, right? It's, you look at traditional TV, especially you look at traditional TV in a market like India, the emphasis is on going from free to pay, right? You want to get those subscription revenue because you think the advertising market is softening, and you want to shore up your subscription revenue because right now the addressability isn't too good. Whereas you look at something like Crackle, and most of the other companies have a paid offering in that space, and yours is a free offering, and it seems to be working.
And it's not either or, we've built a great business around the world on a subscription, on a dual revenue stream model. And we would never throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's a hedge, and it's an also, it's a over here, it's an over the top, the programming is different. We're not competing with ourselves. I think sometimes some of the cable or satellite operators might perceive it as a threat just because it's something new or different, but when you really drill down to it and you look at the programming and you look at what we're doing, it's really not, because it's specifically designed not to compete, not to cannibalize, or to kind of really go after that business. It's really meant to be supplemental, and we're true to that positioning, and as long as we are, we can work our way through that.
What else would you do in the non-linear TV space? Since you've looked at Crackle, and you've built it in such a way that it doesn't really cannibalize any of your offerings. And as the demand for non-linear TV viewing or content of traditional TV programs grows, would you look at something else in that space maybe? What are you doing in that space?
Well, I think if Crackle is sort of the vehicle for us to play in this particular space, that the natural evolution of Crackle is and will be, in a way, what it has been for our linear networks around the world as they mature. As I said, at some point you max out on how big an audience you can garner in a lot of international countries with American programming, and so you have to go local, and you have to either acquire or produce local programming. Crackle is another outlet for us to create original programming and serve in a different sort of way, like the US network would for some of our other programming. So Crackle is now producing more and more original content for themselves, because it's a different way to get eyeballs. It's a different way to have a conversation with the advertisers. It's a way the advertisers can be involved with Crackle in a much more integrated sort of way, rather than just buying whatever that nonlinear version of spots is. There's product integration and environment integration and so forth. And so in that way, it's not dissimilar than in a conversation you might have if you owned other US networks or were providing to them. But also, you're building a library. All of this content is very transportable internationally, and so we either run it on our networks internationally, or we license it to other broadcasters in the territory. We put it in the home entertainment digital space, and so it becomes a whole kind of different part of being that content provider, while mostly being driven by a network strategy, but it also gives us that other piece of the puzzle.
Let's move to India.
Here we are.
Future of television, from your perspective, you have a fairly large operation there, pretty diverse in terms of your offerings, pretty representative in terms of your offerings elsewhere also. Where do you see the market going? And again, very interesting market, because parts of it are very sophisticated. Parts of it are still emerging. So where do you see the Indian television market moving ahead?
Yeah, we were talking before the session about this market that we've been in now. I think it's 17 years, which is a long time, but it's also, as somebody on one of the earlier panels said, a very nascent marketplace in comparison to other markets around the world. India has been a great market for us. Some smart people